Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in this video we're going to do our first winter 2022-23 look ahead. We're going to be looking at some various longer range forecasts. What could we be seeing at least for the early part of winter into the middle of winter as well. Now we're going to go through some of the Met Office predictions. Again, these are not vigorous predictions, but they're likelihood charts, and we're going to have a look at their latest blog as well, where they do talk about the potential for colder weather into the early part of the winter. We'll have a look at some ECMWF long-range charts, and then we'll also have a look at what's going on in the stratosphere, at least at the moment, and we'll finish by having a bit of fun looking at the CFS, which we'll be able to have a look at sort of daily charts. They're incredibly inaccurate, but it is a bit of fun, and have a look at some of the trends perhaps in the longer term. Now, you may have seen by the thumbnail that it is looking possible that we do see a cold start to the winter. Now, I don't want to hype anything up, but these are just the indications we do have at this stage. As you well know, it is impossible really to forecast weather, let alone more than sort of a week ahead. So looking at sort of 2-3 months ahead, it is really quite speculative. But the long-term drivers and what some of these models are showing within the next 2 or 3 months is for the possibility of a colder than average, or at least area where we do have colder weather at times in the start of winter before it turns more westerly dominated and milder towards the second half of winter. So it could be a scenario where we see generally average conditions in the start of winter, but a lot of colder snaps before it trending more above average towards the second half of the winter. But of course, it is, as I said, speculative, and we'll just be having a look at what the likelihoods are today. So remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well. The link's in the description. So if you start from data from the Met Office, this is the UK 3-month outlook that was issued about a week or two ago, and again, the next issue is in a few weeks' time, and we'll have a look at that again when the next issue comes out, and it's for the period of October all the way into December. So it does cover the first month of winter, but of course November can see winteriness, especially in the second half as well. So there is possibility of some winteriness there. When we do talk about early winter, we can always bring November into the equation. We did see actually snow towards the last few days of November last year, so it is possible. So we do have to include that last week or two of November into potential winteriness as well. And of course, going back to 2010, which is the December to remember, which I've done a video on before, we of course saw some very wintry weather in November. So it's not out of the picture. It's not as likely as seeing wintry weather in December, January, February, or even March, but it is still possible. So the 3-month summary is near average rainfall, most probable with a slight increase in the likelihood of dry. So that, to me, indicates that there's more likely going to be higher pressure in this 3-month period than lower pressure. Again, Met Office is quite ambiguous with their outlooks because, of course, if they did say, well, we think there's going to be massive high pressure systems or massive northerly winds or whatever, then people will take it a little bit take it a little literally, and then we'll be seeing headlines in some of the papers saying coldest winter ever coming and all this sort of stuff. But so that's why it's a little bit ambiguous. But for what I take from that is there is likely to be more higher pressure than normal. Heaviest and most widespread rain will likely be across western and northern areas. Again, that's not too unusual with the jet stream generally coming in from the westerly direction. And of course, as I'm recording this, we've got quite a few wetter and westerly based days coming up. While there is a reduction in the likelihood of a colder period overall, impacts from cold weather remain possible later in the period. So again, later in the period for this is early winter, so some November, December time. And of course, Met Office pretty much every year now, so there is a reduction in colder periods. So the year we see the Met Office say there's a more or higher than normal chance of seeing a cold winter, then we will be in sort of an ice age sort of situation, because we've not seen that for many years. But at least they are acknowledging there is the possibility of colder weather, a probable decrease in storminess as compared to normal for late autumn and early winter, again indicating higher pressure, perhaps the jet stream not being quite as strong into late autumn and early winter. That's November and December. So again, signs of higher pressure blocking perhaps there. Now if you scroll down, these are the likelihood of impacts. from the Met Office. So again, we have a 10% chance the season will be cold, so the next 3 months will be colder than average, a 70% chance it will be near average, and 20% chance it will be mild. Now you might think for a colder winter this is not particularly not particularly good if you want some snow and stuff like that. But actually, compared to what we've seen over the last few years, where it's normally been sort of 1.5 times the normal chance of milder than average season, this is actually quite a cold impact or likelihood of impact charts and probabilities than we've seen compared to the last few years. So very much telling me that yes, temperatures will generally most likely be around average. We've got a 1.2 times normal chance of being average, a 70% chance the season will be average, but there will be cold snaps in there. That's the only thing that would bring these temperatures down, because generally we are now milder than the averages that the Met Office uses here. So there's a chance of a real chance of colder snaps. We can see that even better by having a look at the precipitation. There's a 25% chance the season will be dry, 1.3 times the normal chance, and a 65% chance the season will be near average, or 1.1 times. And interestingly, only a 10% chance it will be wet than average, or 0.5 times. Again, indicating higher pressure will be in control to at least a certain extent, and the jet stream won't be as active as it normally is, again indicating amplification in the jet stream, blocking patterns, and perhaps colder weather impacts. Now, of course, one thing we have to take into account this winter is with the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis, we don't actually want cold weather for the good of the country really this year. But of course, we're only looking at the data, and unfortunately for these crises we are in, it does look likely we've got sort of higher than normal chance of colder weather. Again, not going by these exact probabilities compared to averages that were made decades ago, but compared to the last few years, we have seen colder snaps, but generally mild weather, we are looking colder than that, and especially chances of cold weather towards the early part of the winter. Of course, it's not anything exceptional. This is pretty much forecasting a normal winter, but I think a lot of people do forget, because we have had so many mild winters over the last 5 to 10 years, that an average winter does normally include quite a few cold snaps, quite a bit of snow, and again, lying snow averages in Scotland are sort of 20 to 30 days across the winter. So almost a third of the winter has lying snow in some areas in Scotland, and even areas in the south average around 4 or 5 days. Especially if the sort of moderate hills and stuff average maybe 4 or 5 days a winter of lying snow. So if we do see average conditions, yes, it does mean there is a decent chance we do see quite a few cold snaps. So, of course, not anything bitterly cold, not anything sustained cold from these likelihood of impacts is possible, but most likely is it could be average with milder, but also some very cold interludes as well. And of course, this being the start of winter, perhaps a colder than average start of the winter. And we'll see that emphasised a little bit in a minute when we have a look at some of the raw charts. So now if we do go over to the Met Office blog, this is a little bit more informal. This is on their blog page on the website. You can see this, it goes back, they put blogs out quite regularly. And we've got a blog that was posted only a few days ago, on the 6th of October by the Met Office press team, where they say, what can we say about the weather this winter? And you can see here, Professor Paul Davies, Met Office Fellow and Chief Meteorologist, said, weather patterns for October look mobile with a westerly or southwesterly airflow likely to bring Atlantic weather systems across the UK at times. And that's what we've been seeing on the shorter range models and mid-range models that we look in the videos daily, resulting in periods of wet and potentially windy weather. A greater proportion of which will affect the north and the west. Temperatures are predicted to be above average in October. Interesting that they say above average temperatures. You'd expect that with a westerly flow, but we've seen from some of the ensembles and the operation runs recently is that actually upper air temperatures could look slightly below average. So it'll be interesting to see what that actually does come out with. But definitely the westerly and Atlantic influence is what we are seeing. November and December look more settled, with high pressure likely to dominate our weather. So very similar to what we saw in those probability charts. And as I said, higher pressure perhaps dominating more. Exact weather conditions will be dictated by where the high pressure sets over the Atlantic, so where the high pressure goes, where any blocking sets up, but we are likely to see a higher incidence of northerly airflow, so mid-Atlantic ridges up towards Greenland highs potentially, preventing mild moist airflow into the UK from the Atlantic Ocean and increasing the potential for cold snaps, with some threats of snow and ice mainly in northern areas. So very, very interesting that from the Met Office. Very rarely do we see them say, especially in sort of a speculative blog like this, where we're a month or two away from anything being possible like that, of them saying there really is a higher incidence of northerly airflows. Now, northerly winds could just be brief colder snaps, little northerly high pressure topplers where we see a cold air mass for a couple of days here or there, or it could be a proper blocking, maybe sort of November 2010, December 2010 sort of conditions. It can range anywhere from that. So we can't take too much from it, but if you're looking for colder weather, this is pretty encouraging, and it's not encouraging because for those who are very worried about the energy crisis this winter, that's not a particularly good sign, because even if it doesn't produce loads of snow, even if it just produces quite cold conditions with under higher pressure, a lot of frosts, cold overnight temperatures, whether it snows or not, that doesn't really matter. It's the temperatures and how that sort of strain on our energy. So yeah, very interesting seeing that from this Met Office blog, and you can see their ensemble mean anomaly today, or from this that was issued back in September, the mean sea level pressure for October, November and December, so end of autumn into early winter. You can see the oranges out to the North Atlantic towards Greenland, bring the flow generally in from the northwesterly to northerly flow. Again, these are anomalies across 3 months. We're never going to see any major crazy blocking. We're always going to generally see a westerly flow because that is our prevailing wind. But seeing more higher pressure in the Atlantic, and more of a tilt in the isobars, or tilt in the pressure towards the northwest, could indicate that we are likely to have some northerly flows. And you can see where we have lower pressure anomalies towards northern Canada and towards Siberia. That's where the lobes of the polar vortex could be going, because if the lobes of the polar vortex go towards Greenland, if we saw these blues over Greenland, that very much would indicate a stormy westerly flow, but we're not seeing that from these anomaly charts. So yeah, very, very interesting from this today. Could be a real cold start to winter. Now, the most likely scenario as we head into 2023 is for the risk of high pressure to decrease. So into the middle to end of winter, perhaps a decrease in that high pressure blocking and a return to more unsettled conditions with wet, windy and mild spells possible. However, there is a risk we could see a sudden stratospheric warming. If this happens, it could potentially lead to a cold spell for the UK and Northern Europe, although the chances of a very cold winter comparable to 2009/10 are still low this winter. So again, if we did see the stars align, so we did see a colder than average start to winter, which some of these models are indicating, or the Met Office could be indicating, and we also saw a sudden stratospheric warming towards the end of December into January, which could set up repeated bouts of cold weather into January and February, then we could see a colder than average winter. But from the looks of this mention of sudden stratospheric warming that we do bring up every winter, because it does happen, sort of 1 in 2, 1 in 3 winters. It does sound speculative. I haven't seen a lot of support behind it. Of course, we are too early really into the season for any sudden stratospheric warmings. The polar vortex really is only starting to properly form, so yeah, I don't think anyone's got any real good indications on sudden stratospheric warmings yet. But give it a month, maybe 6 weeks, then we would be having a look at that. So perhaps we'll update that a little bit later in this month, into the start of November, perhaps on these look aheads. So yeah, very interesting that they are mentioned sudden stratospheric warming. And as I said, if the stars do align, which we don't want this year because of the energy crisis, then we could see a colder than average winter. But if there's no sudden stratospheric warming, and we just generally saw what the sort of general patterns showing, the other climate drivers are showing, then it would likely be an average to maybe colder than average start to winter, and then an average to milder than average second half to winter, probably averaging average to above average. So yeah, but that is similar to what we saw on the likelihood charts, which was generally around average. Professor Davies added, it is important to bear in mind that long-range outlooks are driven by global weather patterns, and even if these influences, for example, suggest a higher than usual chance of a mild winter, this would not rule out having cold spells or even a colder winter. So, of course, as I said at the start, these are speculative. They have got science behind them, but they're never 100% right. So we always have to take them with a grain of salt. These scenarios would just be less likely based on the information available at the time the forecast is made. It is therefore also important to examine our regular monthly updates to the longer range outlook. So yeah, very, very interesting seeing this at this stage. Of course, we've got a lot of climate drivers, and we'll probably be having a look at those more in detail over the next couple of weeks. But of course, I did want to focus mainly on what the Met Office has been saying in their blog, because this is sort of the first update, really, where we can start to talk about winter as we head towards the end of September, start of October, when we are sort of 6 weeks away now from the possibility of cold weather, sort of the middle to end of November. So if we do now go to the ECMWF website and have a look at their anomaly charts. Again, these are speculative, these are their longer range, this goes all the way out to next year, and these again are in 3-month anomalies showing the pressure, the mean sort of 500 HPA anomalies. So from all of their ensembles this is. So of course there will be ensemble members going massive westerly. There are some going for coldest winters ever, most likely. But this is the mean. And you can see for the November, December, January period, we've got a lot of blocking in the North Atlantic, and this could suggest some very cold weather. Again, it is anomalies, and again, it's ensembles, so they can be wrong and they will change, but this is indicating definitely a lot of blocking over the North Pole towards the start of winter, and again, this could indicate us seeing colder than average weather. And you can see the blues towards Spain, North Africa, showing where the jet stream's diving. That's incredibly far south. This could be, if this came off, incredibly cold. Now, if you run one on, we have to remember these are 3-month anomalies. You can see this is for December, January, February. So for the actual winter period, still generally higher pressure over the top of us into our north. Again, suggesting something colder. But the anomaly is weaker. Now, that could be because we are going further into the future. So things are losing their certainty, or the little certainty they did have, but this could also suggest that it's the start of winter that's got the real high pressure focus, and then as we head towards January and February, we lose that. So this is because November's coming out of the 3-month look ahead here, and February's coming in, reducing the high pressure strength. And then we can see that emphasised even more by having a look at January, February, March. So January could still hold on to this high pressure influence, but look, more lower pressure over the North Pole towards southern Greenland, more of a westerly flow appearing here. And then we go all the way to February, March, April. The high pressure is all the way back to where we'd expect it, with a westerly based winter, back to our south with a west to southwesterly flow. So this definitely indicates that perhaps definitely November, December has a higher pressure, colder blocked sort of on anomaly at this stage. January, perhaps a bit mixed, difficult to say, but definitely February into the start of spring, where we can still see significant colder spells, does definitely look like it's going to go westerly. So it does look likely, from what we've seen today, from both the Met Office and from the ECMWF charts today, that a colder than average winter is very possible, and perhaps you could even say a higher chance than normal, a colder start that is, but then it does look likely we could see a milder second half to the winter, so January and February, or at least definitely February into parts of spring, where it goes much more westerly. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, of course, over the next few weeks, but that's just the indications we're seeing from the models today. So if you also have a look at the zonal mean winds, again, I've shown these charts before. They're very useful in the winter because they show a slice through the atmosphere of the mean winds. On the left, we have the actual winds in meters per second, and you expect very quick winds right up the top of the stratosphere, and then you get towards the surface right at the bottom, and that's where we have this general flow we have. And you can see anything from greens up towards pinks. That is a westerly flow. Anything blues and sort of purples, those are easterly flows. So if we want colder the weather, we want more neutral, around that 0 degrees or colder than that, with the flow coming from the north or the east. And you can see generally we'd expect the westerly winds to strengthen, at least at the top of the atmosphere. We can see that over the next sort of a couple of weeks. This is heading towards the end of October. And then interestingly, on the right, you can see the anomalies, and you can see no real big anomalies. So no real bias from the stratosphere or any of the westerly polar vortex winds throughout the atmosphere at this stage. The polar vortex looks like it's trending around average, what we're normally expecting. So this is why I said any indication of stratospheric warming, we're not seeing anything like that at this stage. The polar vortex is following its general pattern and its normal strengthening period, and the anomaly is just around 0 really. So nothing in the stratosphere is indicating anything really westerly based or easterly based at this stage. But of course, we'll keep an eye on this over the next couple of weeks, and of course we'll probably keep an eye on it quite considerably over the winter as well. It's a good way to view the wind speeds throughout the atmosphere, and we can sort of see areas ahead where we could see potential cold weather or big westerly phases where we could see stormy conditions. So if you finish the video by going over to the CFS, this is on Wetter Central. And again, this is a very experimental charts where we basically are able to see sort of months ahead, but in daily sort of snapshots from the pressure level and the upper air temperatures. Again, these do come out 4 times a day. They are very, very all over the place. But if we do have a look at them, it's a bit of fun, and of course if we do see any trends, if we do see a colder than average start from winter from the CFS today, then perhaps we could say there is definitely something there that is also feeding into the CFS and the Met Office charts and the ECMWF charts. So if we do start around the 20th of November, you can see high pressure over top of us, a bit of a westerly flow. We do continue, we see actually a bit of a northerly wind, but we do eventually see proper high pressure up towards Greenland, and for the last few days of November we go bitterly cold in from the northeast. This would be very cold and snowy. Very interesting seeing that. That would follow on very much nicely from the Met Office predictions, or at least likelihoods at this stage, and the ECMWF charts. It does last a few days, so we're eventually going more of a westerly base, but we stay with a general easterly flow all the way into December. This would be quite cold, maybe not quite that snowy, but would be very cold. We see another sort of northerly and easterly push for eventually we go a little bit more westerly based, but the high pressure hangs on, and through the end of the year, we see a bit of a beast from the east pattern with bitterly cold air coming in from the northeast, before eventually we see more of a westerly phase, but then repeated blocks towards Greenland bringing northerly winds, and yeah, really cold into the middle of January. Look at that, that is a proper raw beast from the east. You put on the upper air temperatures to that. Look at that, -10 isotherm pushing in. We see there a low pressure system sliding up from the south. That is very much reminiscent of Storm Emma we saw in 2018. Incredibly cold. Look at all that cold air towards northeast Europe and Russia. Wow. Yeah, very interesting seeing that. And if we run beyond that, we do still see blocking, but more of a westerly flow as we head into February. So this run today definitely showing a lot of blocking. This would be very much a colder than average winter, but as we head towards the end of February into March, not as much blocking, perhaps more of a westerly flow, but still showing some very cold weather even towards the end of the run. So this GFS run today is incredibly cold. Very, very interesting seeing this today. So definite signal perhaps from all the indications today, there is a chance, perhaps a higher than average chance of at least a colder than average start to winter, and perhaps quite a few cold snaps. Again, we'll keep this updated maybe once a week over the next few weeks as we head into November. But yeah, very interesting seeing these indications today. Of course, it's very difficult to say because normally I'm very much happy when we see colder than average conditions. There's a lot of what the viewers want. Everyone wants to see a bit of snow, especially around Christmas time. People look forward to seeing snow and winteriness. But of course, this year, although it's still nice to see winteriness, it's not good with the energy crisis we do have. So for some, this may be an encouraging chart if you want some snow, but for others, this may not be particularly good, indicating perhaps a colder than average start to winter. But perhaps a glimmer of hope with maybe a milder than average second half to winter, which could alleviate some concerns as we head towards sort of January, February, March time. But once again, this is all very speculative. It is very far in the future still, and of course we'll keep you updated and see what the Met Office are saying, the ECMWF charts are saying, the CFS charts are saying, and of course various other things that we'll start to have a look at as well within the next few weeks. What are they saying for the winter ahead? So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.